Hello. I caught my wife cheating, but what I did next turned her world upside down. This is how I got my revenge and rebuilt my life. My name's Chris, and I've been married to my wife, Emily, for almost 15 years. We met in college, had this whirlwind romance, and everything just clicked. We've got 2 kids, a house in the suburbs, the whole thing. To anyone on the outside, it probably looks like we've got a pretty good life. And for a long time, I thought we did too. But now I'm not so sure anymore. The funny thing is, if you asked me a couple of months ago, I would have said everything was fine. Sure, we had our typical married couple fights, but nothing serious. I thought we were just going through a bit of a rough patch. I mean, who doesn't? Life gets busy, kids need attention, work gets stressful. You get caught up in the routine and assume things will get back to normal eventually. That's what I kept telling myself, anyway. But then something weird happened a few weeks ago. It was late on a Friday night, and Emily was out. She said she was having a girls' night out with her friends, which wasn't unusual. She does it every couple of months, and I never thought twice about it. But this time, she came home later than usual, way later. I mean, it was almost 3 a.m. When she walked in, she seemed, I don't know, distant. She didn't say much, just mumbled something about losing track of time, kissed me on the cheek, and went straight to bed. Now, I'm not the type to jump to conclusions, but there was something off about that night. For one, she never mentioned any of the friends she'd been out with. Normally, she'd come back and tell me all about it, who was there, what drama went down, that sort of thing. But this time, nothing. Just silence. I remember lying there, thinking, am I making a big deal out of nothing? But as hard as I tried to shake it off, this nagging feeling kept creeping in. The next morning, everything seemed fine. Emily was back to her usual self, cheerful and chatty. She even made breakfast, which was a bit out of character for her after a late night out. It was almost like she was trying to act extra normal, if that makes any sense. I told myself I was just being paranoid, but something about the way she smiled at me felt forced. Over the next few days, I started paying more attention. Not in a creepy, stalker way, but just noticing things I hadn't before. Little things, like how she kept her phone on silent all the time now, or how she'd laugh quietly at texts and quickly lock her screen if I was nearby. Emily's always been a bit private, but this was different. It was like she was putting up this invisible wall between us, and I didn't know why. The real turning point came the following weekend. We were supposed to go to a dinner party at a friend's place. I was getting ready, and when I came downstairs, I saw Emily sitting on the couch, completely zoned out. She had this distant, blank look on her face, like she was lost in thought. I asked her if everything was okay, and she snapped out of it, saying, yeah, I'm fine. Just tired. But I knew that look. It was the same one she had the night she came back late. That night, as we were getting ready to leave, she got a call. I could hear the phone buzzing from across the room, but she didn't answer. Instead, she quickly picked it up, glanced at the screen, and silenced it. I don't know why, but something about that felt wrong. She noticed me watching and gave me this tight smile, saying it was just a work thing and she'd deal with it later. And maybe that would have been believable, but she looked nervous, like she was hiding something. We went to the dinner party, and everything was normal. We laughed, had drinks, and for a while, it felt like things were back to how they used to be. But every now and then, I'd catch her staring off into the distance, her smile slipping for just a second before she'd catch herself. I tried to push the thought out of my mind, but by the time we got home, I knew I had to figure out what was going on. I just couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to this than she was letting on. So that's where I'm at. I don't have any solid proof, no dramatic confrontations or late-night discoveries. Just this gut feeling that something isn't right, and I don't know what to do with it. I'm hoping I'm wrong, that I'm just overthinking things. But I can't help feeling like my whole world is on the edge of falling apart, and I'm just standing here, waiting for it to happen. After that night at the dinner party, I decided to keep my eyes open. I didn't want to confront Emily without knowing more. I mean, what if I was just imagining things? But something in my gut was telling me I wasn't. So, I started paying closer attention, and that's when the unsettling signs really began to pile up. The first thing I noticed was how often Emily was working late. Now, she's always had a demanding job, and late nights aren't unusual. But suddenly, it felt like she was staying late almost every night. She'd text me around 5 or 6 p.m., saying she had to wrap up a few things and wouldn't be home until much later. And sure, I get it, work can be unpredictable. But what bothered me was how vague she was about it. I'd ask what she was working on, and she'd just shrug and say something like, "Oh, just the usual," without making eye contact. Then, there was the issue with her phone. I know it's normal to have your phone with you all the time, but Emily's behavior had shifted. She was glued to it, even more than before. I'd walk into a room, and she'd quickly put it down, screen facing the table, or slip it into her bag like she didn't want me to see something. It wasn't just that she was using it a lot, it was the way she acted when she was. Like she was always one step away from being caught doing something she shouldn't. One night, I decided to try and make a casual date night out of nowhere. I thought maybe we could break through whatever weirdness had been hanging over us lately. I suggested we go grab dinner at this cozy Italian place we used to love, and at first, she seemed excited. But then, just as we were getting ready to leave, her phone buzzed, and I saw her face change. She glanced at the screen, and all the color drained out of her cheeks. She told me she needed to make a quick call before we left and stepped out onto the porch. I could see her through the window, pacing back and forth, talking quietly into her phone. I'm not proud of this, but I couldn't help it. I moved closer to the door to try and catch a bit of what she was saying. Her voice was low, almost pleading, and I could just make out snippets like, "Not now," and "I'll figure it out." My stomach was in knots. When she finally came back inside, she forced a smile and said, "Sorry about that." Ready to go. Like nothing had happened. We went to dinner, and everything felt strained. We made small talk, but there was this tension, this unspoken thing between us. I could tell she was trying to act normal, but every time her phone buzzed, she'd get this distracted look and excuse herself to check it. I wanted to ask her about the call, about why she seemed so on edge, but I didn't. I kept telling myself it was just work, that I was being paranoid. But by the end of the night, I felt more distant from her than ever. The weirdest thing happened a few days later. I was getting ready for bed, and Emily was already asleep, or at least pretending to be. Her phone was charging on the nightstand, and I noticed a notification light blinking. Again, I know how this sounds, but I was curious. I just glanced over, trying to see who was messaging her so late. That's when I saw the name, Dan, pop up on the screen. And the message, it just said, "I miss you." I felt my heart drop. I mean, who the hell was Dan? Emily had never mentioned anyone by that name, and I didn't recognize it from her work. My mind was racing, but I didn't want to wake her up and start a confrontation without knowing more. So I just sat there, staring at the screen, feeling like my world was starting to crumble. The next morning, I asked her if she had any plans for the weekend, just trying to start a conversation. She seemed caught off guard, but said she was thinking about meeting up with a friend. When I asked which friend, she hesitated for a second before saying, "Oh, you know. Laura." I knew Laura. We've had dinner with her and her husband a few times. But the way Emily hesitated made my stomach churn. It felt like she was making it up on the spot, like she was trying to cover something. That weekend, Emily did go out. She left around noon, saying she'd be back in the evening. But around 4 p.m., I got curious and decided to text Laura, just to see if they were actually hanging out. I didn't ask directly, just sent a casual, "Hey, hope you guys are having fun." A few minutes later, Laura responded, "Fun? Oh, we're not hanging out today, I'm stuck with a work project." I just sat there, staring at my phone, feeling like my chest was about to burst. Emily had lied to me. And for the first time, I realized this wasn't just my imagination. There was something going on, and I had no idea how deep it went. After Laura's text, I spent the rest of the afternoon in a daze. My mind was spinning, trying to come up with reasons why Emily would lie. Maybe she decided to do something else at the last minute, or maybe she was just running errands and didn't think it was a big deal. But deep down, I knew I was just making excuses. There was only one way to find out for sure. I decided to take a drive over to her office. Emily had mentioned a couple of times how she might go in on weekends to catch up on work, especially since she'd been so busy lately. If she wasn't with Laura, maybe she was at the office. I told myself I was just being cautious, that I needed to clear this up before I let my imagination get the best of me. But as I drove, that nagging feeling in my gut only got worse. When I arrived, the parking lot was almost empty. It was a Saturday, after all, and most people weren't crazy enough to spend their weekends at work. I spotted Emily's car, parked near the entrance, and my heart started pounding. I tried to convince myself that this was a good sign, that she really was just catching up on work. But there was this voice in the back of my head that kept saying, "Don't get your hopes up." I walked through the building, past the empty cubicles and darkened offices. There were only a handful of people around, probably there to wrap up a few things before the weekend. No one paid me any mind as I made my way down the hallway to Emily's office. She'd been promoted a few months ago and finally got her own space, a personal office with a view. I remember how proud she was, how we celebrated with a bottle of wine that night. As I got closer, I could see that the door to her office was slightly ajar. My heart was racing, but I forced myself to stay calm, to act normal. Maybe she'd just forgotten to close it all the way. I took a breath and pushed the door open a bit more, just enough to peek inside. And that's when I saw it. Emily was there, but she wasn't alone. She was on her desk, her blouse unbuttoned, with her back arched against the cold glass of her desk. Standing between her legs was a man I recognized from one of the office parties, a guy she'd mentioned a few times as her new subordinate, Kevin. They were so wrapped up in each other that they didn't even notice the door opening, didn't see me standing there, frozen in place. I felt like I'd been punched in the gut. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe, couldn't do anything but stare at the scene unfolding right in front of me. My mind was screaming at me to look away, to just turn around and walk out, but my legs wouldn't listen. It was like my brain was trying to catch up with what my eyes were seeing, and none of it made any sense. Kevin had his hands on her waist, gripping her like he owned her, and she was whispering something to him that made him smile. That smile, so casual, so intimate. The kind of smile you give to someone you care about. Someone you're close to. I wanted to shout, to demand an explanation, but I couldn't get a single word out. All I could do was stand there, numb, as the truth finally crashed over me. I don't know how long I stood there before they noticed me. But when they did, the look on Emily's face said it all. Shock, fear, and then something else, like a mask slipping off. She scrambled off the desk, pushing Kevin away, trying to button up her blouse as if she could somehow pretend none of this was happening. "Chris," she started, her voice shaky. "It's not what it looks like." I almost laughed when she said that. Not what it looks like. I just caught her cheating on me, right there on her desk, and she had the nerve to say it wasn't what it looked like. My mind was spinning, trying to process everything, but all I felt was this cold, empty numbness spreading through my chest. "Really?" I said, my voice barely more than a whisper. "Then what is it?" Kevin looked like he was ready to bolt, his face pale and panicked. But Emily just stood there, her hands trembling, trying to find the right words. I could see her mind racing, trying to figure out what to say, how to fix this, but there was nothing she could say that would make this better. Nothing that would take away the image burned into my mind. I can explain, she stammered, but I wasn't sure if I wanted to hear it. I didn't know if I could. I didn't wait for her to say anything more. I turned and walked out of the office, ignoring her voice calling after me, ignoring the sound of Kevin scrambling to pull his pants back up. My whole world felt like it was collapsing around me, and I just needed to get out of there, to breathe, to think. But all I could see was that image of her on the desk, and all I could hear was the sound of my heart breaking. I don't even remember getting back to my car. 1 minute, I was in the hallway, and the next, I was sitting in the driver's seat, gripping the steering wheel so hard my knuckles were white. I thought I'd been prepared for anything, but nothing could have prepared me for this. I'd spent so long trying to ignore the signs, convincing myself that everything was okay. But now, there was no more pretending. No more excuses. I had seen the truth with my own eyes, and I couldn't unsee it. I couldn't unfeel the way my heart had shattered in that moment, or the way my entire world had been ripped out from under me. I wish I could say that I left that office feeling nothing but sadness, but that would be a lie. Sure, I was devastated, heartbroken even. But as I drove home, the sadness started to transform into something else, anger. A slow-burning rage that grew hotter with every mile I put between myself and that office. I wasn't just going to let Emily destroy everything we had built without facing the consequences. No, if she thought she could get away with this, she was dead wrong. And that's when the plan began to form in my mind. I knew I needed to keep a clear head, and I needed evidence. So, before I left the office, I had quietly pulled out my phone and filmed everything. The door was slightly ajar, giving me a clear view of what was happening on her desk. The recording was shaky, my hands were trembling, but it was enough. Enough to capture every detail, every humiliating second of Emily's betrayal. I played the video back in my car just to make sure I had everything, and I felt that rage bubbling up again. But instead of letting it consume me, I focused. I needed to be smart about this, and I needed to plan carefully. When I got home, I went straight to my study and pulled out my laptop. I spent the next hour drafting a letter, an anonymous email to her company's HR department. I kept it professional, straightforward, but I made sure it had a sting. I wrote about how Emily had been exemplary in managing her department, especially when it came to maintaining close relationships with her subordinates. I even included a line about how she probably spends more time on her desk than at it. It was a cruel, calculated dig, but I didn't care. I attached the video and left a note asking them to reconsider her as a department manager. I didn't know if they would actually do anything with it, but I knew one thing: Emily's carefully constructed image was about to take a serious hit. She'd worked so hard to climb the ladder, to be seen as a respected professional, and I wanted to see it all come crashing down. Maybe she could charm her way out of this one, just like she had charmed her way into Kevin's pants, but not without a fight. Not this time. Once that was done, I took a moment to breathe. The rage hadn't subsided, but I felt a grim satisfaction knowing that she would at least have to face some kind of consequence for what she did. But that was just the beginning. I picked up the marriage contract from my drawer and flipped through it until I found what I was looking for, the clause about infidelity. Emily and I had signed a prenuptial agreement before we got married. It was her idea, actually. She said it was just a formality, that it would protect both of us if things ever went south. But the agreement had a very specific clause: if either one of us cheated, the guilty party would lose everything. No alimony, no claim to assets, nothing. At the time, I didn't think much of it because I never imagined either of us would cheat. But now, it felt like a lifeline. I contacted my lawyer, Frank, the next morning. He's a no-nonsense guy who doesn't waste time on pleasantries, and that's exactly what I needed. I explained the situation briefly, and when I mentioned the infidelity clause, I could hear him nodding on the other end of the line. "Sounds like you've got all the ammunition you need, Chris," he said. Just make sure you document everything. Texts, emails, whatever you can find. The video helps, but we need to make this airtight. If she contests it, we'll need to show she broke the terms of the contract. I've got a video, and I'll see what else I can dig up, I said. Just, make sure she doesn't walk away with anything. Consider it done, he replied, his voice calm and reassuring. She's the one who signed this contract, and it's going to work against her now. I'll get the paperwork started. In the meantime, get everything else in order. After I hung up, I felt a sense of grim determination. I was going to take everything from her, just like she had taken everything from me when she decided to cheat. She wanted to act like our marriage didn't mean anything. Fine. She could keep her affair, and I'd keep everything else. The next few hours were a blur. I packed up all her belongings, every last piece of clothing, every little trinket she had brought into our home. I didn't bother to be gentle about it, just dumped everything into boxes and bags, making sure there was nothing left of hers in the house. I even found a few things that I suspected weren't mine, gifts from Kevin, perhaps. Those went straight into the trash. Then, I called her parents. It was a short, awkward conversation. I just told them that things between Emily and I were over, and I was bringing her things over to their place. I didn't go into details, that wasn't the time or place. But I could tell from the way her mom's voice quivered that she knew something was wrong. I didn't care. They could deal with the fallout however they wanted. Finally, I drove over to their house, my car packed with all of Emily's things. When I got there, I didn't even knock. I just started unloading the boxes onto their front porch. Her parents came out, looking confused and worried, but I didn't say much. I handed them a single envelope with the divorce papers inside. You can give this to her when she gets home, I said, my voice cold and detached. She'll know what it's about. As I drove away, I felt an odd mix of emotions. Part of me felt relieved, like I'd finally taken control of a situation that had been spiraling out of control. But another part of me felt empty. Like I'd just ripped out a part of my life and didn't know what was going to fill that void. I'd loved Emily once, hell, I'd thought I still did. But now all that was left was this hollow, aching space where that love used to be. And for the first time, I wondered if any of this would actually make me feel better, or if it was just going to be another scar, one more wound that would never fully heal. I thought cutting Emily out of my life would bring some kind of closure, but instead, it just felt like I was waiting for the other shoe to drop. I had sent that video to her company, filed for divorce, and made sure she had nothing left from our marriage, but there was still this lingering sense of anticipation, like there was more to come. A few days after I dropped her things off at her parents' house, I got a call from a friend of mine, Jake. He worked in the same industry as Emily, though at a different company. We'd always exchanged stories about our work lives, so it didn't strike me as odd when he called, at least, not at first. But then he said, "Hey, man, I heard some crazy stuff about Emily. Are you okay?" My stomach tightened. "What do you mean?" "People are talking about her getting fired. Something about inappropriate behavior with a subordinate." Jake said, his voice uncertain. I didn't want to believe it, but then I remembered you'd been pretty quiet lately, and I thought I'd check in. I felt my heart skip a beat. So it had actually worked. The email, the video, it had made its way up the chain. I'd hoped it would force her to face the consequences, but hearing it confirmed was surreal. "Yeah," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "It's true. I found out she was having an affair with one of her employees, and I guess the company found out too." "Wow," Jake said, sounding genuinely stunned. "They're not just letting her go quietly, man. They're making it clear she's not welcome back. It's all over the place. She's been completely humiliated." Hearing that should have made me feel victorious, but instead, it felt hollow. Maybe I had imagined some kind of dramatic, satisfying end where I'd see her suffer and feel justified, but now that it was happening, it just seemed pathetic. She'd thrown everything away, her marriage, her career, everything, for a fling. And now she had nothing. "Thanks for letting me know," I said, my voice flat. "I appreciate it." Jake hesitated, probably unsure of what else to say. "Look, if you need anything, or just want to talk, you know I'm here, right?" "I know," I said, managing a small, bitter smile. "I'll be okay." We hung up, and I sat there for a while, trying to process everything. I wasn't sure how to feel. I thought seeing her lose everything would make me feel better, like it would make up for the way she betrayed me. But it didn't. It just felt like watching a car crash in slow motion, horrifying, but impossible to look away from. Over the next few days, bits and pieces of news about Emily kept trickling in. I tried not to pay attention, but it was hard not to hear things when people were talking about it everywhere. She was getting kicked out of her job in disgrace, and word spread quickly. Emily had been well known in her field, respected even. Now, her name was synonymous with scandal, and nobody was going to forget it anytime soon. But the most unexpected update came when I was out grocery shopping. I was grabbing a few things for the weekend when I ran into Susan, a mutual friend who lived in the same neighborhood as Emily's parents. She looked surprised to see me, and after some awkward small talk, she brought up the topic I was trying to avoid. "I heard Emily moved back in with her parents," she said, lowering her voice as if she was sharing a juicy piece of gossip. "Did you know that?" I tried to play it cool, shrugging like it didn't bother me. "Yeah, I figured she might. Not like she has anywhere else to go." Susan's eyes widened a little, and she leaned in closer, almost conspiratorially. "You should hear what her mom has been saying. I ran into her at the market last week, and she was just venting. She kept going on about how stupid Emily was, throwing away her marriage and kids for a one-time affair. She actually said, 'What kind of moron trades a loving family for something so meaningless?' I didn't even know what to say, so I just nodded and tried to change the subject. I couldn't help but let out a short, bitter laugh. The image of Emily's mother, a strict, no-nonsense woman who always looked down her nose at me, berating her daughter for being the fool, it was ironic, to say the least. Emily's mother had never been shy about voicing her opinions, and I could only imagine the guilt trip she was putting her daughter through every single day. "Sounds like Emily's not having a great time, then," I said, not bothering to hide the satisfaction in my voice. Susan shook her head. "Not at all. It's sad, really. But I guess she brought it on herself." She hesitated for a moment, as if considering whether or not to say something more. "You know, everyone's talking about how she used to have everything, and now it's like she's lost it all overnight. People can't believe she did that to you." I nodded, not sure how to respond. I'd spent so much time imagining the moment when everyone would find out what she did, but now that it was happening, it didn't feel like a victory. It just felt empty. I thanked Susan and made my way out of the store, but her words kept echoing in my head. Driving back home, I thought about Emily, stuck in her parents' house, dealing with their judgment every single day. I imagined her mother, the same woman who used to praise her for her career achievements, now tearing her down, calling her out for the mess she had made of her life. I had wanted to hurt Emily, to make her feel the way she made me feel when she betrayed me. And maybe I'd succeeded, but now I realized it wasn't going to change anything. The damage was done. Our marriage was over, her career was over, and the person I thought I loved was gone, replaced by someone I didn't even recognize. I pulled into the driveway and just sat there for a moment, staring at the house. It used to feel like home, but now it just felt like a place where something had been lost. Maybe Emily was suffering, but so was I. Maybe she was paying for her mistakes, but I was the one left picking up the pieces, trying to figure out what to do next. I didn't know what the future held, but for the first time, I wasn't sure if revenge was going to be enough to help me move on. Maybe I needed to start focusing on something else, on my kids, on rebuilding my own life. Maybe the best revenge wasn't seeing Emily fall, but learning how to stand back up after everything had crumbled. I thought I had heard it all. After everything that had happened, the affair, the fallout at her job, and her moving back in with her parents, I didn't think there was anything else that could surprise me. But then, about a month after the divorce papers were filed, I heard the rumor. I was at the coffee shop, grabbing my usual morning cup, when I ran into Linda, one of Emily's old colleagues. We hadn't spoken much since everything went down, but she gave me this strange, almost pitying look as she approached. "Hey, Chris," she said, hesitating like she was trying to decide whether or not to say what was on her mind. "Have you heard about Emily?" I stiffened, not really wanting to get into it. "No, what about her?" Linda glanced around, as if making sure no one else was listening. "She's pregnant," she said quietly. "I don't know if you knew, but, well, I just thought you should hear it from someone instead of rumors." For a moment, I just stood there, stunned. Pregnant? I hadn't seen or spoken to Emily since the day I dropped off her things at her parents' house. We'd barely exchanged a word during the entire divorce process, only speaking through our lawyers. And now, she was pregnant. My mind raced, but it didn't take long for me to piece things together. There was no way the child could be mine. The timeline didn't match up. I had caught her with Kevin in that office, and if she was pregnant now, it wasn't from before that. This was Kevin's mess, not mine. I forced a shrug, trying to act like I wasn't affected. "Well, it's not my problem anymore," I said, my voice colder than I intended. "I hope she's happy." Linda's eyes widened slightly, as if she was surprised by how detached I sounded. Maybe she expected me to react differently, to be angry or upset, but I didn't have anything left to give. "Yeah. I guess," she said softly. "Just thought you'd want to know." We exchanged a few more polite words before she left, but I barely registered them. My thoughts were a jumbled mess, trying to process this new information. Emily was pregnant, probably with Kevin's child, and she was dealing with it on her own, living under her parents' roof, facing their constant judgment. The old me might have felt sorry for her, might have even reached out to ask how she was doing, to offer support. But that guy was gone, and he wasn't coming back. I didn't call her. I didn't text her. I didn't even think about sending a message. Whatever she was going through, it was her own doing. She had made her choices, and now she was dealing with the consequences. If she thought she could run back to me for help, she was wrong. She had made it perfectly clear who she wanted to be with when she betrayed me, and I wasn't going to be her safety net just because things had blown up in her face. The only thing that crossed my mind was relief that I had escaped before things got even more complicated. I had two beautiful kids who were my world, and I was focused on making sure they were okay, that they had a stable, loving home despite everything that had happened. I wasn't going to let Emily's mistakes drag me down any further. I had already spent too much time dealing with the fallout from her decisions. Over the next few weeks, I threw myself into my plans for the future. I sat down with my kids and talked about all the things we were going to do, just the three of us. We planned a weekend getaway, a trip to the beach, even a movie night where they could stay up late and eat as much popcorn as they wanted. It felt good to have something to look forward to, something to remind them that life was still good, even if their mom wasn't around. I started making changes around the house too, small things at first. I redecorated the living room, moved some furniture, and even started painting one of the bedrooms to turn it into a playroom for the kids. It was like I was trying to erase the memories, to start fresh, to build a new life that didn't have any traces of Emily left in it. Every now and then, I'd hear whispers about her, people talking about how she was struggling, how she barely left her parents' house, how her mom had been overheard saying, "What kind of idiot ruins her life like that?" It was sad, but I didn't let it get to me. I wasn't going to get pulled back into that mess. Emily's life was hers to sort out now, and I had my own to live. I knew the kids were adjusting too. They asked about their mom sometimes, but I kept my answers simple. I didn't want to lie to them, but I didn't want to drag them into the ugly truth either. Mom's not living with us right now, I'd say. But we're going to be okay. We're going to make the best of things, and I'm always going to be here for you. And I meant it. I was going to make sure they had the best life I could give them, even if it meant doing it alone. I started thinking about the future, about what I could do to make things better for them. Maybe I'd take them on a big trip next summer, just the three of us. Maybe I'd sign them up for that summer camp they'd been asking about. I was making plans, real plans, and for the first time in a long while, I felt like I was moving forward. Emily's pregnancy was just another chapter in a story I was no longer a part of. She had made her choices, and now she was living with the consequences. I wasn't going to let her mistakes define my life anymore. I had my own story to write, and it didn't include her. Months passed, and life slowly began to settle into a new normal. It wasn't easy at first. There were days when the memories of Emily and everything we had built together would creep up on me, days when I'd feel the sting of betrayal all over again. But I kept moving forward, step by step, for the sake of my kids and myself. I threw myself into work, focused on spending quality time with my children, and gradually began to build the kind of life I had always imagined for us. We had our little routines, our inside jokes, and the house that once felt like a place filled with painful memories was now filled with laughter and warmth. It was a healing process, slow but steady. I started to see the light at the end of a very dark tunnel. I didn't hear much about Emily after the rumors of her pregnancy. Occasionally, someone would mention seeing her around town, looking withdrawn and tired, or I'd catch wind of a whispered comment about her being back at her parents' house, struggling with whatever situation she had gotten herself into. I never asked for details. I didn't need to know. For all intents and purposes, our lives had gone in two very different directions, and I was determined to keep it that way. One day, while I was at a parent-teacher meeting for my son, I ran into a familiar face, Emily's mother. I hadn't seen her since everything fell apart, and I could tell by the way she hesitated, glancing around the room, that she wasn't sure if she should approach me. But then she took a deep breath and walked over, offering a small, strained smile. "Hi, Chris," she said softly. "It's been a while." I nodded. "Yeah, it has." I wasn't sure what else to say. I could tell she was searching for the right words, and for a moment, there was a heavy, uncomfortable silence between us. "She's not doing well," her mother finally said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Emily. She's been struggling a lot. I think she regrets everything, but she doesn't know how to make it right." She looked at me, her eyes pleading, as if she was hoping I had some magic answer that would fix everything. I took a deep breath, feeling a pang of sympathy despite everything. "I'm sorry to hear that," I said, my voice calm but firm. "But there's nothing I can do for her now. She made her choices, and I'm focusing on my kids. That's all I can do." Emily's mother nodded slowly, as if she had expected that answer but still needed to hear it out loud. "I understand," she said, her shoulders slumping slightly. "I just thought, well, never mind. Take care of yourself, Chris. You're a good man, and you've been through enough." I thanked her and watched as she walked away, disappearing into the crowd of parents and teachers. I felt a strange mix of emotions, sadness, relief, and a sense of finality. It was like the last chapter of a book I had been reading for too long, and now it was time to close it. As the months went by, I continued to focus on my own life. I signed my kids up for the summer camp they had been begging to go to, and we took that weekend trip to the beach. We made new memories, ones that weren't tied to the past, and I started to feel more like myself again. I was healing, and I could see my kids were too. They still asked about their mom sometimes, and I'd tell them the truth in the simplest way I could. "Mom's figuring things out right now, but she loves you." That was enough for them, and it was enough for me. The finality of my marriage to Emily became clear when the divorce was finalized. I received the official paperwork in the mail, and for a moment, I just stared at the envelope, feeling the weight of everything that had happened. It was over. Really, truly over. I signed the papers, sent them back, and closed that chapter of my life for good. A few weeks later, I was at the park with my kids. It was a sunny, crisp afternoon, and we were playing catch, their laughter echoing across the playground. I remember watching them run around, their faces lit up with joy, and thinking how far we had come. Life wasn't perfect, but it was better. It was ours. As we were getting ready to leave, my phone buzzed with a message. I checked it, half expecting it to be a work email, but it was from a number I didn't recognize. I opened it, and my heart skipped a beat when I realized it was from Emily. It was a short message, just a few lines. "I'm sorry for everything. I know I can't undo what I've done, but I hope you can forgive me someday. I wish you and the kids all the happiness in the world." I stared at the message for a long time, trying to figure out how I felt. I didn't respond. There was nothing left to say. I had made peace with everything, and I didn't need to reopen old wounds. Emily was right, she couldn't undo what she had done. But I had moved on, and I wasn't going to let her pull me back into a life that no longer existed. I put my phone back in my pocket, took my kids by the hand, and we headed home. The sun was starting to set, casting a warm, golden glow over everything, and I realized that I was, for the first time in a long time, truly content. I had my kids, I had my health, and I had a future that was bright and full of possibility. I didn't need anything else. Emily's story had ended for me, but mine was just beginning. And as I drove home, listening to my kids chatter excitedly in the back seat about their favorite parts of the day, I couldn't help but smile. We had made it through the storm, and now it was time to enjoy the sunshine. Bye-bye.